Maybe a new touring car chassis will fix all my problems. Shh. Hello and welcome to Quiet RC. As usual, I am Rob. Today we are here to go through building Team Associated's brand new on-road touring car, the TC8. And we are doing the steel spec version for carpet racing. Now it's been about 7 years since Team Associated has released a touring car. The TC7.2 came out in about 2018 according to my research. When was the Team Associated TC7.2 touring car originally released?
It was originally launched in August 2018.
Okay. And one reason that I was really interested in the TC8, which I mentioned in my previous unboxing video, is that my first touring car, outside of the TA02, but the first real competition level one, was a TC3 back in the day. So let's get into building it. Right away in bag one, step one, had an issue right off the bat. The 4 6mm flathead screws that are used to attach the ball studs for the suspension, I was missing them. So now it turns out they had packaged 4 button head screws versus the 6mm flathead screws that they were supposed to package. I ended up just using some for my own stock, but it did worry me a little bit that this was going to be something along the lines of a infamous other Team Associated kit that I had built. However, going forward, I think I only was missing one motor mount screw all the way at the end, and there were no other missing parts or anything like that. However, I have heard of other people missing parts. Somebody mentioned in the TC8 Facebook group that they were missing a pin for the CV drive. A lot of people have mentioned that they were missing the flathead screws that I was missing. And apparently somebody at my club was straight up missing the whole chassis. They contacted Team Associated, and I guess Team Associated sent them out the chassis right away. Attaching these ball studs, I used Loctite. There are points in the manual where they will explicitly say to use Loctite. Team Associated actually includes Loctite in the kit. However, I mounted the balls and almost right away, even after putting a little dab of Loctite on, they were already loose. I'm wondering if because the steel is not as soft as aluminum that even, cranking it down a little bit doesn't really hold it in place. So I was maybe a little aggressive with using Loctite, but I feel it's like better safe than sorry. How these suspension arms go together is there's a little kind of plastic insert into where the arm actually mounts to the chassis. They're a little difficult to get in. In fact, Team Associated released a video showing how they recommend you put them in. I ended up using some channel locks, which I use a lot in my builds. You can also just put it onto a flat surface like your build surface and press it on there, but I ultimately, either way I did it, I used a flathead screwdriver to kind of align that slot at the top, which runs perpendicular to the actual kind of plane of where those are going to be mounted. While the arms are different left to right, front to rear, they are the same. They're just flipped around. When you're building them though, you're going to be putting in some grub screws that are ultimately going to be your shock mounts. For the front, those shock mount screws are going to be inboard, and for the rear, those are going to be further outboard. Speaking of shock mounts, let's get into how they're actually attached to the car themselves. You have these little arms. There's a slight difference. The rear shock mounts are slightly straighter where the front ones are a little bit more bent. Now, how these get attached is they are attached to the bulkheads. And the bulkheads, there's 4 of them, left and right, front and rear, but they're identical all the way around, so you don't have to be careful about which one you're selecting there. The way they get attached is there's actually a pin that slides through the bulkhead, through that bottom part of that shock mount, and then it's tightened in with a grub screw with, of course, a little bit of Loctite. You can actually leave the second screw out, which tightens it to the bulkhead, and what this does is it creates an active shock mount. I haven't played around with it at all, but some people may have out there, but I'm really kind of interested to see how that actually works out. But for the kit build, I am doing the extra step, which is a small cap head screw that tightens that shock mount to the bulkhead itself. You're also going to put a grub screw in the top of that shock mount, and that is where the shock actually mounts to. And then you leave about 8 millimeters out of there to tighten that shock onto. At this point, bag one is done, and that's where I figured out that, like, okay, they'd actually just included 4 6mm button heads instead of 4 6mm flathead screws. Well, since you've made it this far, I just want to remind you to please like and subscribe. Only helps the channel. We also have a Facebook group now, which you can just scan the QR code, and there's also a link below to check it out. You can come over and really talk about anything you want, but mostly about the channel if you could. I should mention that everything I'm talking about in the video here that I will put a link to down below so you can find it if you want to get it. Here we got to an interesting part with the spur gear pulley hub assembly. You put in 2 different bearings here, and they are extremely tight. Now, they're tight by design, but maybe just a little too tight. When I first put it together, I put it on there, and when I tightened down the button head screw that's supposed to hold it in place, it actually locked up the whole pulley system. They want you to put a shim on the back of it to make sure it's clearing the motor mount, but the front, I ended up putting a couple of like a 0.3 and a 0.2 millimeter shim just so that button head would clear the shaft. As I was kind of taking notes for doing this part of the video, I decided I'm going to do a little more research on it to see if anybody else has had that issue, and I posted a question onto the TC8 Facebook group. Somebody there posted another video that Associated had released on how to actually get these ball bearings properly seated. And really what they want you to do is put them in there as best you can, put it on, tighten it down, and that will actually push them into place. So I thought, okay, I'll go do this. I did it, and I got way too aggressive, and I ended up cracking the bearing in there. And then to get that bearing out, it actually took a ton of persuasion. Thankfully, I had some extra bearings of exactly these size, so I just kind of was able to get everything out of there, redo it, put it back together, push it together. Was a little bit more gentle this time, but used the method they suggest, which is putting those shims by the motor mount, tightening it down, and then everything's seated. Now, once I did that and did it the way they suggested, I only needed the 0.1 millimeter shim and then no other shims on the actual screw itself to clear it, and then it spins freely. Speaking of the motor mount, when you mount it on there, you have your option of how stiff you ultimately want to make the chassis. One of these ways is through mounting that motor mount, and I opted for the stiffest setting, which is all 4 screws on the bottom. And then you're on to building the rear diff. The rear diff is a gear diff here, and you're going to put a small shim in there, and then you're going to slide this pin in. The easiest way to do it is with a pair of tweezers to get it in there. Even those pliers would work, but tweezers are great. I also use, it's not technically green slime, but it's basically what green slime is, which is this suspension lube. The stuff I use is from Nolene. At some point, I've done the calculation of how much it actually costs versus the Team Associated version. But this is just a tub that I have laying around now, and I use it all the time. And as you can see, it's very green and very slimy. The center shafts of this Planetary Gear setup is actually not just like a plus sign like I've seen in a few other kits where it's just a plastic plus sign. It's 2 metal shafts, but they do have cutouts so they actually seat against each other in there. Fill it up with the kit supplied 5,000 weight. I've seen setup sheets so far from Team Associated that people are just keeping with that 5,000 weight. The front is just a pulley and just snaps together the 2 sides, so nothing much there. Now, when you go to install these, how they actually sit into the bulkhead is they have these kind of cam mounts, and there is a high one and a low one, both of which are included in the kit. For high traction carpet, they suggest going with the high setting. Now, as you put it in here, you'll see the belts are a little loose. Later on, I did tighten them by rotating those cams a little bit, about 3 clicks on each side, front and rear. Actually dropping those diffs into place, I did have to use the kit supplied 0.2 and 0.1 millimeter shims on both sides, on both front and rear, to get all that play out of there, but now they're really nice and secure and spin very freely. For the top deck, it's a two-piece top deck, like a lot of these are coming with. Where it mounts on the motor mount, there is kind of a recess cut into that top deck, so make sure that you are paying attention to that. Otherwise, you'll have to take it apart and flip it back over like some other maybe people not paying attention. And here you'll see I'm using a tweak stick. This is actually from RC Maker. This one that I have was actually purchased for the Yokomo MS 1.0, which of course I've done a video on. The little kind of stands that go and actually press down onto the bulkheads are more or less specific for each car that they sell them for. However, the feet for the MS 1.0 did fit right onto, just barely, onto the bulkhead for the TC8, so I was able to use it, push that down. What that does is that creates equal pressure, so you tighten all the screws, and then it doesn't have any tweak of the chassis when you're putting that top deck on there. And now we're moving on to the hubs for the front and rear. What these have is they have these little blocks and spacers. So you have the plastic hub and then you have this aluminum block, and there's a spacer that goes in between there. The manual says that you can increase or decrease these spacers to change the steering feel. And according to them, if you decrease the space or a smaller spacer, you're going to get a more direct steering feel. I'm not sure I'd be able to feel this. However, I will say, and I'll talk about it more when we get a little bit of the run footage at the end, that I think I can kind of feel a little bit of what they might be talking about. The front steering arms are a little bit longer than the rear arms that go on the hubs there, so just pay attention to that when you are putting those together because they're close but not exactly the same. And here are the front steering hubs finished, and you'll see here this is the kind of hub and spacer situation.
You use that word too much.
That I'm talking about. On to assembling the CVs, which you have to do both front and rear, obviously both left and right as well. They also supply you with black grease in the kit, so use that, kind of smear it on the inside, slide in that little barrel, and then you're going to slide this kind of aluminum collar over all of that, and then same on the other side. You drop the pins in. I've seen some discussion back and forth about whether the pins should be exactly lined up or if they should be opposed. Honestly, right now I can't remember exactly what I did, but so far the car moves forward, so I guess it's working. Finally, you slide this whole plastic collar over, which is an interesting way that it's done. I've never seen it that way, and so far it doesn't seem like they're moving, but maybe they have to be checked. This one looks like it might have moved a little bit, but that's what holds the pins in. You mount these hubs to the lower arms via what they call a pillow ball. Now what this does is it actually is loose on the hub itself, and then you use this pillow ball nut, this kind of factory team blue aluminum nut, and a little plastic spacer that goes over it. What I did is I actually tightened it all the way down so it couldn't move, and then backed it out just a little bit so there was no play, but it would move freely. Now the next few steps are just building all of the turnbuckles for the front steering, for the servo to the bell crank, and the rear turnbuckles that adjust your toe in and toe out in the rear. And then also they kind of assemble very similarly the top arms where you kind of put the turnbuckles into the ball cups and then slide it all the way through the top of that arm and screw it in. Again, I just started with the kit setting, but then ultimately had to adjust a little bit just to get the starting camber that I wanted. I will mention though that these ball cups are directional, even though they look like they're just a hole. You'll see, I don't know the best way to describe this, but there's kind of like this steep slope on one side and then kind of a shallow slope on the other side. That steep slope is going to be the part that goes down over those ball ends. And once you get that figured out, they actually snap on fairly easily. The whole steering setup is really interesting because it's basically all just one piece held on by two screws to the center of the chassis. It has this kind of long arm that comes up and over, and that is what the steering servo attaches to. They do tell you to use Loctite when attaching the steering servo, and of course I also used it attaching the whole assembly to the chassis. This is another part where they tell you how to get those ball bearings fully seated. Again, kind of put it on there and screw it all the way on. I also put the turnbuckles on first because I was worried that I was going to have a hard time actually getting them attached kind of underneath the top deck. However, I had flipped one of them around, so I had to take it off and put it on, and it wasn't that hard to put on after it was installed. So I guess you can kind of go either way. Now moving on to the shocks themselves, the dampers, and these things are tiny. They're getting smaller and smaller on all these cards. It's really fascinating. This is also the step where it's telling you to use that other bag that was included in the kit. If you'll remember from my unboxing video, it says use these screws and use these, call them X-rings, but they look like kind of shaped O-rings. Replacement X-rings, bag 6, step 1. And there are these very small screws here.
See, I did say that.
So I can't tell the difference between the O-rings or the X-rings that were kind of originally in there versus the ones that they supplied to replace. Obviously there's maybe some compound difference. As far as the tiny screws go, the screws that are originally in the package, in the kit, appear to be like a little shinier, but they also maybe appear to be a little narrower or thinner. So maybe that was an issue with some sort of tolerance. But using the ones that they supplied, a little bit of that green slime or my off-brand green slime, and put the bottom of the shock body together. And then the instructions don't explicitly tell you which piston to use, but the picture is of the 4-hole piston. So I forgot to actually look up what other people are doing, but so far it's worked out okay for me to use that. And it's so nice to be able just to screw that on rather than messing around with E-clips on either side. So that's a nice upgrade that we've gotten. When you go to fill the shocks, you do want to make sure that you push that shock shaft up about halfway.
Hi, yes, Roger Deakins, acclaimed cinematographer for movies like Skyfall, Blade Runner 1917. Yeah, your job's secure.
Back and forth or anything like that. You put that shock cap on. That shock cap is also directional when it snaps onto the ball stud that you put on there. Then those just have some spacers that go on the top of the shock mounts, and you screw those on. It's actually really simple. I was worried it was going to be really difficult with how tight and kind of compact everything is in there, but it was really easy to put on both the top, bottom, front, and rear, everything. When I installed the bottom ball cup of the shock shaft, I did have to use the method where you're actually using wire cutters to hold on to it. Because these shock shafts are so short, I can't get my normal shock tool in there. I did at one point buy an off-brand Hootie shock tool that has a narrower clamp to it, but it snapped the first time I used it. So those Hootie ones are expensive, but don't bother buying a knockoff one. When assembling the front bumper, just a little tip here, start the screws but leave them loose because it didn't quite perfectly line up to seat together, and it was hard to get the screws in from, I believe, underneath once I had done the top ones, because I had to back them out, get everything a little loose again, and then kind of sandwich it all back together. For the sway bars, I think the sway bars are a little over-engineered. They have bearings on them and everything like that, and it's just kind of a little much. And I kind of tightened down the collars the first time I put it together in kind of a weird way, and so it kind of like cocked the whole thing a little sideways. I think really you could probably just have it pass through and clamp down with, like a little plastic. You don't need all this engineering on these sway bars. The body mounts are kind of cool how they do these. So they have these factory team blue aluminum kind of collars, and on these collars they have 3 positions that allow you to fine tune the exact height or distance here on the back on where that body is going to sit. So it's kind of a cool little fine tuning adjustment. The battery holder post, now what I'm using here is just a standard 2S hard pack, racing pack here, a standard size, not a shorty. And they do give you 2 sets of these battery mount posts. They give you long ones and short ones. The long ones were too long, and the short ones are maybe a little short, but it does, because the actual tabs that hold it in place are plastic, it's flexible. I actually kind of like it that way because it does seem to hold it nice and secure without it being like so rigid from carbon fiber or something like that. Make sure when you install it, there is a kind of flat side and a kind of recess side. The recess side you want up because there's a little black O-ring that goes there to provide a little resistance from it spinning. The included 30mm fan mount mounts right to the center motor mount, which is nice. I've had to use a Exotech one that attaches to the motor and everything like that before, so this is nice to have it right on there. They also include a receiver plate. Again, nice that it's just, because these chassis are so full of holes and everything like that, it's nice to have just a flat surface to kind of be able to servo tape stuff to. As I mentioned earlier, I think I was short one 8mm screw, which is what they use to hold on the motor. They do give you a 92, and I believe this other one was 114 tooth, 64 pitch spur gear. I used a 92 tooth, and what I had on hand was a 53 tooth pinion, which gives me around like a 3.3 gear ratio. The internal ratio is 1.9, which is similar to the other touring cars that I have, or exactly the same as the other touring cars I have. And I forget what the final gear ratio is there, but I'll put it probably right here. However, that got me close to what I've been running with my Yokomo when I was running it as a 25.5 touring car. And when I got it to the track, it ended up being just right. Now here we have the nearly completed chassis. It is nearly completed at this point in the video because I didn't have 5mm battery post plug on hand. And I also didn't have an extra set of the gravity slick tires here that we use at our track. So I took it to the track. I mean, I literally finished this thing at about like 10:15 in the morning and just threw everything into the grocery getter and got to the track. They had some 5mm posts. They were out of tires, but one of the guys at the track had an extra set of tires that he had already worn in a little bit, and they ended up working perfectly for that night for racing. Now, I'm also using the Biddy Design Hyper body, the ultralight one. I have another one that I haven't painted yet, but I am using this one that I had on my Yokomo originally. I just took off the Yokomo sticker. I've done this a lot with some of the cars that I race. I kind of take an old body before I actually put a bunch of effort into like a new one, you know, because I'm going to be tuning this thing and probably not treating the body with a whole ton of respect.
I have no respect. I don't get no respect at all.
What was cool though is the body mounting hole locations are exactly the same as the MS 1.0, so I was just able to lift it off and plop it right on. I also guessed the body post height correctly first time around, so that was cool. The opening footage here of kind of getting it on the track, this is literally the first battery pack that I'm running through it, and it is the official Quiet RC Stig. Lou driving it for me to take it for a few laps. He's also really good at giving me some feedback on setup and things like that, so I was able to kind of get it at least ready for that evening for racing. Now, I was racing it carefully, but I was trying to remain competitive. What was great is almost exactly the kit setup. I think I did take a little bit of a camber out, maybe by like ½ degree. I ended up turning in one of the qualifying rounds a 90-point-something% consistency, which is pretty good for me, and I would think it's pretty good for most people, so that was nice. It did make it through the whole night without a single breakage. And not that I had any bad crashes or anything like that, but it's still nice because my SP1 that I was racing in USGT, I think it broke in the second qualifier and in the main as well. So, come on! Didn't do quite as well with that one. This one in 25 TC held its own. Okay, I didn't place very well, but it did pretty well for my first time out with it. I would describe the car as really smooth. I used the term warm, not necessarily like the car felt warm. It's kind of a weird way, but I think I was more saying it was more of a contrast to it being like cold, kind of too precise.
Nice, man.
And the car was just kind of more smooth and kind of like flowed a little bit more like Michael Jordan, if I could mix my metaphors here a little bit.
1 for 9. The look away to Livingston. Jordan. Oh!
I'm definitely excited to continue racing this in the 25.5 TC category. I'm definitely going to work on tuning it a little bit more, trying to figure out exactly where I think it could sharpen up a little bit, but I do like the feel of it. I think maybe that also has something to do with the fact that the arms are plastic versus carbon fiber. It gives just a little bit more of that kind of smoother and more flow to actually driving it. I would say for kit building enjoyment, I would say on a scale of the Reflex 14B all the way up to any Tamiya kit, this is probably somewhere like over here. Well, that's all we've got for you today. Please remember to like and subscribe. Also remember we've got the Facebook group, which you can just scan that QR code or click down below. as I mentioned earlier, everything I've kind of discussed in the video here that I will have a link to down below, just so you can find it very easily. That's all we've got for you today. Thank you so much for watching. We will talk RC again later. What's for lunch today?
How about a turkey and avocado sandwich with a side of chips? Sounds good, right? Want me to suggest something else?